We'll be turning our attention to a pressing issue that goes beyond figures and government statements. It affects the food on people's tables, the cost of transport, the quality of schools, and the state of hospitals across the country. We're talking about Nigeria's deepening debt crisis and the government's growing appetite for loans. According to the latest data from the Debt Management Office, Nigeria's total public debt as of June 2025 has surged to 124.3 trillion naira. That's around $93.9 billion. Out of this, 41.2 trillion naira is external debt, while 83.1 trillion naira is domestic. What does this mean for the average Nigerian? Well, if you divide that figure by the estimated 220 million population, every Nigerian, including children, now carries a debt burden of over 565,000 naira. Do you have 565,000 naira to pay that debt? All right, but for many Nigerians, the reality is different. From Lagos to Lafia, from Maiduguri to Yenagoa, people are asking, where is the impact of all these loans? Just of recent, an additional $21 billion in foreign loans under the 2025-2026 borrowing plan was taken. The government says the money is needed to finance key infrastructure and to stimulate the economy. So this morning we ask, are we truly borrowing for development, or are we digging deeper into a hole with no ladder in sight? Joining us to break down the numbers, the risks, and what this means for everyday Nigerians is a renowned economist and financial analyst, Yusha'u Aliyu. Good morning, Maryam Yusha'u. It is good to have you here again.
Good morning. Thank you.
Welcome, Madam Yusha'u.
Thank you.
It's glad to have you join us.
All right, the biggest question to ask is, how are these debts impacting Nigeria and the economy, and how feasible is it for Nigeria to continue borrowing, especially with previous debts on her head without, payment, and how is that going to affect a repayment plan as well? I know those are a lot of questions in one, but then we would have to do that at this moment.
First, you have to understand why debt in the first instance, and how is the process of accruing debt for a nation. In the Nigerian context, there is a government establishment that is strictly looking into the debt issues, either from the federal, state, or local government. That is Debt Management Office. That aside. But before we even engage ourselves into the risks and uncertainties of debt issues, we have to also give cognizance to the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, which is the body in charge of looking at how government can deal with deficit. Then we have to come to deficit angle in most of our budgeting process, from this state, federal government, including local government. That is where we used to get it wrong. And if you are to establish why the deficit, you have to also look at what is the exchange rate at the time you are planning that budget, and what is your income, and what are your accruals. These are things that most of the time defines how debt is sourced and how debt is used in an economy. The deficit, for instance, is high when you look at probably the expectation of government in trying to source revenues from taxes, revenues from sales of crude oil, revenues from financial institutions. So, and the debt itself is of two components, the domestic and international. So, but when you understand all this, you have to also come to understand what is the capacity or the economy itself. What is the economic growth target of that economy? If you have a target, then definitely you have to look at your commitment. And if your income cannot sustain your target, then definitely you have to also go to financial market locally, that is domestic or internationally, to source. These are the preempts of how debt is coming into us. But managing it depends on the efficiency of the fiscal and monetary policies of a state. Today, we are on floating exchange rate. And that's what has put us in a big risk because our potential would define our exchange rate. So if our potential is defining our exchange rate, then our productivity also has to define what we gain from the market. So today is unfortunate that politicians themselves are not looking at certain economic ingredients, and they are not focusing so much on the priority of the economy. I can remember vividly in the last administration, there was what was called budget budget of priority. That budget of priority was carved out of what is called zero-based budget. That you look at your priorities, and when you look at your priorities, you now look at the component at which you achieve certain target in all those priorities. And that is why in any circumstance, you look at sectoral development, you look at the performance, and you look at where to invest and where not to invest. So however, looking at all this, you come back again to other macroeconomic factors, debt to GDP. This concept would define to you that the GDP target, the economic size target of that economy, does that commensurate with what you have around? We have to remember now, in 2025, that is already a target of building $1 trillion economy.
Absolutely.
And when you are targeting $1 trillion economy, then you have to come and rearrange and realign and recalibrate your monetary policies. In monetary policy, you have to set a target, and you have to also come to your fiscal models and see how you can bring in. And that is why today we have banking capitalization in process, so that even if the economy has grown to $1 trillion economy, then the requirement for that economy can be sourced within that economy. These are some of the macroeconomic targets in trying to achieve. But this economic concept as built in and then operated differently in different economies has certain strategies to observe them. But unfortunately, our political system of 4-year tenure, do you understand, is limiting our concept. Remember, past administration, even on the eve of handing over power, goes to the international market and borrow. So these are the things that are built up our debt profile. But it's a thing of concern. If you check the GDP, that is debt to GDP, you realize that we are still around 56%. But if you take, for instance, bigger economy, like the economy of the United States, it's already about 77%. Do you understand? Debt to GDP, 77%. Even though the size of the economy, this is $136 trillion economy, we are targeting a $3 trillion economy. So these are some of the things you look in before you now begin to analyze why borrowing, how borrowing, and what is the use of borrowing.
Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Yusha'u, what policy measures will you recommend to the government to reduce its reliance on loan and promote fiscal sustainability?
By looking at our priorities, because you cannot do everything at a time. You must have a policy thrust where you are looking at, for instance, you are developing energy sector, then you look at the component that is required to build that, because in every GDP, there are elements of features that is assisting the GDP to grow. And the target, for instance, the IMF target of 3.4 in 2025, for instance, if you can achieve that, then what is the target if you are to build $1 trillion economy in the next 6 years? So, but we are operating medium-term expenditure framework. So whatever plans that you have to look at your capacity. Definitely, Nigeria has been depending on oil, but with the recent fiscal reform, we are looking at even the budget pegging. You peg our budgetary provisions in dollar term should be a thing of the past. We have to come back, because if we are to build all the component of internally generated revenue into Nigeria Revenue Service, if it is effective, in the next 6 months, 8 months, 1 year, you begin to understand that there is need to peg based on what you are generating as income. But priorities, as I said, we are looking beyond oil, but oil still remains significant, because if you have a positive in oil and gas, meaning that you have a capacity, you have to develop it. But outside that one, if you are to build small, medium enterprises, what is most significant in all economies of the world is to build a sufficient and a very contestable energy where you can have production at lower costs, you sustain production, and besides that one also, what you need to focus. We have advantage in agriculture, but all this while, sometimes I don't even shed my opinion on agri, because we are not putting on mechanization at this stage, where you have to employ few artificial intelligence to manage large portions of land, and you get higher productivity. So for agricultural practices, we need to develop new mechanisms, modernize it. It's unfortunate you have an arable land of over, out of 100%, and we are not accessing 20% of that, and we have the potential. So if we go on and on, you now understand that sectorally we need to develop our energy, and we need to develop our manufacturing, and that is where we can take away the excess labor and then put them into use for productivity.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Madam Yusha'u. Unfortunately, it's quite short, but then we would have to go. It's an absolute pleasure having you here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming to this segment on Daybreak.
Thank you very much.